What if the books on your shelf could actually shape the way that you lead, parent, and follow Christ? In this episode, I'm talking to one of my mentors about some of our biggest takeaways that we've had from books that we've read over the last 20 years. Today's guest is Derek Maxson. He's the co-founder of Front Porch, a longtime church consultant and pastoral coach. He's been a friend and a mentor for about 20 years, and Derek's been shaping leaders, including me, for decades. Today, we reflect on the principles and the pages that shaped him. From startup wisdom to parenting teens, we're covering the leadership lessons that stick and the books that teach them best. So grab a notepad and let's dive into some of the books and the principles that have formed us.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. And great to be on the pod with everybody. Hey, yeah, so this book right here, this is the gold right here. The Contrarian's Guide to Leadership by Stephen Sample. And am I wrong in saying that it's the gold, Zach?
Oh, it's absolute gold. It fits me too, because, and you, we're both contrarians.
I am definitely a contrarian. Absolutely. And so I heard Stephen Sample speak at an event, a simulcast event. I'm going to say it's 15 years ago or so. And Sample has since passed away, but at the time that he wrote this, he was the president of USC, the University of Southern California. And when he spoke about some of the principles that are in this book, I'm like, this is really good stuff. So one of the principles in this book that I personally really benefited from. So I tend to be in my leadership and decision making and intuition and impetuous leader where I'm looking at stuff in real time and I'm like, okay, I think this is the path. And so I tend to be quick with decisions. And there's a great place for that. In fact, so my business partner, Zach Britton, not Zach Wise here, but he tends to be a very methodical decision maker, and this would drive me nuts. In fact, I used to have hair, but he made me wait so long for decisions that it all just fell out along the way. Anyway, but I learned this principle from Stephen Sample, and what that did for me was with Sample's principle of thinking gray. Part of being an impetuous or a decisive decision maker like that is you tend to think in black and white. You do this or you don't do this. And gray says, we don't know what we're going to do yet, but we're not just waiting, we're not paralyzed by this. So thinking gray is not a decision-making strategy of, I'm fearful to make a decision. It's a strategy that says, I am going to wait to make the decision until I know more information or I'm compelled to make the decision. So if I don't need to make the decision today, there's no real harm in me waiting until tomorrow or the next day or whatever. But on a certain day, the decision must be made. Sample's point is, if you use all that thinking gray time to acquire more information, to develop your thinking about the particular decision, your decision will be better.
Yeah, I remember this being a really difficult thing for me to lay hold of. I think it was probably the day that you hired me or welcomed me on board. You told me that I was going to need to get comfortable with ambiguity. And that sort of bled into this conversation. Much younger Zach was very uncomfortable with gray thinking, but I think I've appreciated it so much. I love that idea of waiting until the last responsible moment to finally commit to a decision.
Is there an anecdote from your own life about that you've ever implemented this and you feel like it's been really helpful?
Yeah, the first things that come to mind are either career changes or large financial decisions. Like when we were buying our first home, there's like this emotional imperative to close quickly if you think you found the place that you want to live or something like that. And this principle was already well centered in my mind when we found a house that we were tempted to get attached to. And it was something that we had to slow ourselves down on, pray through a lot, and try to make a more meticulous and less time-driven decision. I think that served us really well.
Did you end up buying the same house or a different house?
Well, we almost bought like three different houses, and I think it was the fourth one where we actually went all the way through with it. And we're really glad that we did. That time, that taking that time to slow down, I think served us really, really well. How about for you? Like, where's this principle worked for you?
Parenting, I think, has been an area where I've applied this a lot.
Mm.
So parenting when you have littles is a little more black and white. There's things that your children need to do. There's things that they should not do because it's unsafe for them or because it's not your family's preference. There's different things, but at a certain point in time, a lot of that really shifts, and their independence and their movement, their natural developmental movement away from the parents as the center of their life to their peers as the center of their life creates a lot of difference in how we parent. And now, as I mentioned, all my kids are in their 20s, and so we had, of course, parenting challenges with all three, and one of them in particular, because of some of the choices that she was making, made parenting for us a challenge in unanticipated ways. We didn't really think we were going to be having some of the conversations we've had over the years. So thinking gray and viewing the idea of we might make immediate decisions about something for our children, but if we don't have to make that decision immediately and we can like string out the conversation on that, I think there's a lot of advantages that we've experienced as parents in that. There's another book that we read, a parenting young adult children book by an author named Jim Burns, and I don't remember the exact title of it, but the phrase in there was, unrequested advice is taken as criticism.
Mm.
And so when I'm thinking I'm being helpful in some way, or trying to influence that decision that they're going to make, I could sense that it was being received as criticism. And so as much as I just want to control the universe around me, having this think gray thing in there, I think has been really helpful in this transition from children to adolescent to young adult.
That's so good. As I've kind of leaned into sharpening the saw when it comes to coaching, that's one of the things that I keep coming back to is ask for permission to give advice. Because as you said, unsolicited advice is received as criticism. That's such a powerful concept.
And you quoted it right. I said the wrong thing, but it is unsolicited advice. Thank you.
Well, how about I'll give you my first one, because we're already looking at contrarians. Know which hills you're willing to die on, and then don't tell anybody which ones they are. Such a powerful concept.
I like the second part. That's great, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because not every hill is worth dying on, right? But I suppose your number one actually leads really well into this one. If you're always thinking black and white, then there's probably going to be too many hills that you're willing to die on. But there are probably only a few that you actually should die on. And so being able to think gray or delay decisions and then identify which hills actually are worthy makes a lot of sense. But then, boy, I think that the gold, as you said, is in the second half. Don't tell anyone which ones they are. Always leave them guessing, right?
Yeah, and I suppose the them is really interesting. So here's the place where I would not apply that particular caveat there.
Okay.
I would not apply it with your spouse.
Amen to that.
But the know which hill you're willing to die on is a really important principle, like in a marriage.
Yeah. So could you think of one example where this has served you well through the years?
Yeah. So I would say that the majority of my big leadership mistakes in my younger years would be fast, decisive decision making, absorbing the conflict of that. I think it was covering my insecurity in that. So if I made a decisive decision, moved on it, then that appears strong to the people around me and keeps me from feeling as insecure about stuff. I can think of tons of them. I was working in a church in my mid-20s, and I chose a hill to die on, and I think I died. And in retrospect, that was not a hill to die on. And if I told you about it, you'd be like, "Oh yeah, Derek, that was not the hill to die on." But I thought it was important. but I think it was masking my insecurity.
I think I got to have the other side of it where the particular issue I'm thinking of was one over, let's call it like not core doctrine. I found myself able to debate well over a topic, but not be willing to like divide over that topic. But I didn't have to tell anyone that in advance. But in my youth, I think I would have been inclined to blow it up over that issue. But this principle, I think, served well in that case.
Yeah, and you and I had a good conversation over some beverages last week where we were throwing in some things that are even like right on the edge of essential or non-essential. And it's like whether it's essential or non-essential is almost in the eye of the beholder. And in a couple places, we're seeing things with some nuanced differences or maybe even some polar differences there. I'm not sure exactly. But hey, we're still doing the podcast, so
more beverages
that's
required.
Kind of good.
So, Derek, which hills are you willing to die on? You don't have to answer that. It was a trick question because you're not supposed to tell anyone what they are.
That's good. All right, man, you got me, Zach. That's good.
Let's move on to your next book.
All right. So let's see. I'm going to pull in a couple books and actually the same principle. There's a book that a coworker of ours got us going with a few years ago called The 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And basically this book is about innovation and it's about creating new things. And one of the elements is that, well, what it tries to avoid, where you make the huge leap into an unproven place, only to discover once you've spent all your money, committed all your resources, so to speak, burned all your ships, only to find out you made a really stupid decision. And so 4 Steps to the Epiphany is kind of a pathway through that. There's another book that goes with this I'm going to pull out right here, which is an easier read version of some of the principles here. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. And Stephen Blank, the guy from the first book here, was a mentor to Eric Ries. And so really, if you're going to read one of them, read Lean Startup. Another book that I've read that goes along with this in some ways, but is a totally different application, is the book Halftime by Bob Buford. And Bob Buford was a business guy in Texas, owned a bunch of TV stations and like cable TV networks. And basically he decided that he could keep doing business forever. He was really good at it, successful. Everything he did prospered well. But he wanted to do at his halftime, at his halfway kind of point in his adult life, he said, I'm going to do something more significant in my second half. My next thing may not be as profitable as my first thing, but it's going to be more significant. And so he wrote a book about that. Now, he has a term here that is found in these other books, doing a low-cost probe. And the idea is to do an experiment. You don't need to quit your job, figure out how to spend every dollar you could get, tap all of your friends and family members for investment dollars before you really know if something's going to be successful. Try to do something in a way that gives an out if it's not successful. Or if you just need to pivot and it's like, oh, we're close to successful, but it's going to look different. So that idea of low-cost probe has been really good. I've made a couple of high-cost changes, and a couple of them are good. And then I've made a lot of different lower-cost experiments. Some things that I've done haven't been very good, and some things have been good. So I'll give you a couple on each. So one of the things is that I made a really high-cost choice, and my mom didn't like it. So I was like 28 years old, and Zach Britton, my business partner, invited me to start the company with him. And my mom was like, I don't think so. You should stay with the company you guys are both working for right now, because then when Zach leaves, you can be the boss. And, my mom's thought was the security of working for a company, all of that. Instead, I'm going to go and work with this guy I've known a year. And what's that going to look like? So that was a high cost jump in a big way. And that worked out well. I made another job leap, and that job leap, it had the right outcomes attached to it, that it was going to be good. But I would say it took about 6 months before I was trying to figure out how I could undo that. And that was, one of the more difficult seasons of my life, to have made a big jump from a place that I liked, but I was really ready to move on from, and then jumped into a place I thought was going to be great, but it was not great. Low cost, I'll just mention a thing about the coaching work that I do. A couple of years ago, I was hanging around one evening and I heard about a guy that was doing some cohorts for people in his space. And so he said, "Oh yeah, so I just started doing these cohorts, and so it enabled me to get around myself other smart people who were doing the same kind of business I was doing." And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting." So I continued to listen to this, and I thought to myself, I want to work with churches and pastors more. I was really kind of starting in this. And I could lead a group. I don't have to have all the answers. I just need to be able to curate good content. I need to find good resources, and I need to get smart people at the table, or in that particular case on Zoom, and open good conversation and try to do a good job of giving everybody a chance to speak and learn. And so I did a low-cost probe, which is 6 Zoom sessions around one topic that I thought I could do something with. And now I have 3 groups that I'm doing. They've been going now for the better part of 3 years. And I think they're a cornerstone of the work that I do. It didn't cost me anything. I didn't have to quit a job to do it. I found ways that I could add value to other people's lives. They kept coming, which tells me that this is good. Yeah. Anyway, so low cost probes.
That's great. It's funny. Derek and I did not really strategize on this, but my number 2 is a very, very similar one. Jim Collins's book, Good to Great. And I take the dust covers off, so there's no fancy thing here, but Good to Great. And he talks about the concept of bullets before cannonballs. The idea being that, at least allegedly, when there were sailing ships and they were trying to dial in their trajectories for shooting cannonballs at enemy ships, they would fire musket balls first in order to get the right powder to, angle ratios and all that stuff, before they spent a lot of powder on bigger munitions trying to target a ship. And then he says that in the context of doing that with products, but I think it's true with career changes and lots of other things as well. The way that I have taught this with my clients, and the way that I tried to implement this with the development teams that I was working with back at Front Porch, was what are the non-fatal mistakes that we can make early and as inexpensively as possible before we invest large amounts of time and resources to build something that we're not sure is going to work. And if I'm honest, I'm still learning this sometimes. I wish that I would do better at this concept, but it's something that I need to probably practice a bit more. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is when I get a new product idea in my coaching business. Let's say I want to build a new curriculum. My first instinct is to go build the whole curriculum and then actually pilot it and see if people like it. And there's probably a bullet version of that I should be testing first, piloting with a small group of people, and then sort of slowly refining. That's an area where I've shot myself in the foot several times over the last couple of years.
So like doing a webinar before you do the course.
Right. Or even, just an in-person, like, hey, coffee shop, we're doing this certain topic, and see who takes.
I think there's 3 areas where this consideration is highest. One of them is if you're going to hire somebody, that's by definition not really a low-cost probe. Number 2 is if you're going to get, some kind of facility, even if it's a rental or a lease. If you are spending money on a space to do a business or something, that's going to have a cost. The third thing is where you spend a bunch of your personal time before you have feedback. And so in a certain respect, my time is free. I can choose to spend my time however I want to, and I don't have to pay myself for my time. Right. But in another sense, time is an incredible high cost. So if I can spend some time and then figure out from some customer feedback from other people whether or not you're on the right track, avoiding hiring, avoiding signing a lease, and avoiding spending lots of time before you get feedback.
Now, I think you've actually tested this a little bit. I recall you sort of doing this with a few of the projects that you've experimented with over the last couple of years. Sometimes you'll build just a landing page that sells a concept, and what you're really looking for is signups to gauge interest before you actually go and invest in the bigger thing. Could you share, one of those?
Yeah, actually, I had a buddy of mine kind of turn me on to that. Eric Swanson. This is his book right up here. Transforming a City is the name of that book. But he had this idea: advertise something on social media with a landing page with a coming soon, or be on be one of the first ones to, get your iPhone basically. So you don't build anything on the product. You're just measuring response. And then you can even follow up with the people who respond and say, you signed up for this, and I just want to find out, I want to ask you a couple questions. Like, what is the thing that made you most want to sign up for this release? And so whatever they tell you tells you what you should build that product to accomplish. And if you get, 20 data points on that and 13 of them agree on something, it's like you might have a product.
It's a really, really killer way to start something. And so inexpensive, right? I mean, you could probably throw that page together if you were really focused and not distracted one day. All right. So the last one I had prepared was from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And there's so much to take away from this book, but one of the ones that has just been really helpful for me is begin with the end in mind. The more I've studied how to manage and lead people, this has been true. And then I've recognized, it's actually true for leading myself too. But defining the results and the outcomes that I want, and then reverse engineering how I'm going to get there, has been a life-altering skill that I'm still in the process of figuring out how to master. But that has always been, for the last probably 10 years, where I start when I'm getting ready for a new project or when I'm trying to make some big decision in life. It's try to look down the road a little bit and go, well, what do I want to be true? And then what are going to be the steps to get there? So has that been useful for you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I was like 24 when I was given 7 habits. So yeah, first things first, begin with the end in mind. I really do apply begin with the end in mind to a nice dinner out. You have to know what the dessert is and work your way back from dessert. But it also, I think, applies in business and life too. But what's a real life non-eating example of beginning with the end in mind for you, Zach?
Yeah, this one is really high level and it's a little vulnerable, but I'll share it anyway. A few years ago, I read a book by Michael Hyatt called Living Forward. There's probably a dozen books that are sort of like this, but he's advocating for building a life plan. And he starts with the end in mind. He actually has you write your own eulogy. And that's something that I actually read every single morning to start my day. I look at roughly 9 different categories of my life and some statements I've written about where I would like to end up. So as an example, I would like to be a 95-year-old man, or however long God lets me live, still happily married to Melissa, still enjoying her, still partnering with her in marriage, in the ministry that God's given us, still working together to laugh a lot, cry together appropriately, work together to love and guide our then 60-year-old children, and figuring out what that looks like, and just enjoying life together. But that informs how I treat her today. It informs how, I greet her in the kitchen when I see her, or, to make coffee and leave it on the post for when she wakes up. Like, all of those continue to just remind me, hey, like, I've got to build towards that. How old that will be, like 85 years of marriage if we make it that long, which is just, no, it'd be 75 years. But that's not going to happen on its own. And so I keep trying to remind myself of what I'm aiming at. Is that a answer your question?
Yeah. So you're sitting there saying, all right, if I want to, be married, and really, like, more accurate, if you want to keep Melissa from going and it may not really be like a marriage ending, But, lots of marriages end while people are still married.
That's so true.
And, and so people are just kind of walking it, but there's not really the depth of relationship and all the various ways of expressing intimacy that we would want. So kind of those walking dead marriages.
Right.
So how do we avoid this? Well, I think it's hard work. I think it's learning stuff. I think it's a increasing personal humility. So when you learn stuff, you figure that you're smarter and better. And so you should be able to do stuff, and then you can share that with your spouse. And, in our case, tell a wife, hey, here's how you can come up to my level. But, it's actually like, I need to increase my humility. That's kind of a decrease humility move there to, just share like, hey, I read this great stuff in a book.
Right.
Do it, then our marriage would be more awesome by, 0.6%. And yeah.
My observation of Christians who are given over to the heart of Christ is, as you read saints of old, pick who you want, Spurgeon or, Augustine, as you read their work, they become more acutely aware of the gap that there is between themselves and a holy God. And we kind of look at them and we go, wow, there's like Jesus, and then there's Augustine, or there's Jesus, and I'm not even close. But that's not the way they view themselves. They view themselves, Paul would say, I'm the chief of all sinners. And we look at Paul and we go, well, I would like to be like him. But I think you're right. Like the heart of Christ lends itself toward humility and us seeing the more we learn just how far we have to go. How about you? Like you gave the dessert example, but like what's a bigger world version of that?
So I think for me, I'm really looking at initiatives in my life and work and saying, that reverse engineering thing is true. So I think that I can be prone to want to build something before I know whether or not anyone in the world wants it to be built. Mm-hmm. Because it's just fun to build stuff. For me, building is software, but for somebody else, it might be something different. So beginning with the end in mind says, what other things that maybe I don't like to do as much because I like to write software, I may not like to do other things, or I just want to be expedient with it. I'm sitting down and my football team is getting blown out on a Sunday afternoon, and so I just start coding something. And then 3 weeks has gone by and I haven't even gotten up from the couch. What have I really done? I've done a whole lot of stuff on the front side that may not really have the reality and the outcome that I want. So definitely wanting to let ideas percolate more before taking action is something that I need to do. But I'll also say that like my decision to do that as cohorts a few years ago, I mentioned a little while ago, was, we'll just say it was Tuesday evening that I'm listening to this podcast. And then I said to Christy, I said, I got this idea that I'll do these cohorts. And tomorrow, if I wake up and I don't think it's a stupid idea, I'm just going to send an email and see who signs up. And so I woke up the next morning without thinking it was a stupid idea. And by the end of the day, I had a few people who had said, oh yeah, this sounds great. So, but in some ways that was beginning with the end in mind. But It was also very, it was an impetuous decision to put myself out there like that.
This might be a good segue to one of your concepts you want to talk about. But before we transition, do you think there's anything necessarily wrong with doing something for your own enjoyment? Like if that was the end that you started with and it only ever was like for an audience of one, is that a bad thing?
It's not bad, but if you need to make money or do business thing or something, then maybe that's the bad thing. There's an opportunity cost to things that we spend our time on. So I mentioned, like in some ways my time is free, but the opportunity cost of what else I could be doing, whether that be in my personal life, since I never got off the couch and I only ordered DoorDash for 3 weeks, there's a personal health impact to that. Maybe time with my family that didn't happen, more productive money earning activities for my business or my work. So I do think there's a cost to that. But yeah, it's fine to, to have the audience of one on something, or to feel like I accomplished something. I really enjoy doing it. And so you could look at it and say, well, there's a personal,
Right.
just enjoyment of doing something. But, there's a great benefit to beginning with the end in mind. And so I'm 55. I turned 55 this year. And so I have somewhere, money earning wise, I got somewhere between 5 and 20 years of doing that. And it sort of depends on what I kind of want to do with my life. Separate from that, I've got, I'm going to say 25 years on the high end of maybe top-notch value I can bring to people. Maybe I have less than that, who knows? People hit diminishing capability at different times.
Sure.
But based on that, like, what do I really want to have be true, so that when I'm, whatever, my dad's age, 76, so when I'm 76, what do I want to be able to look back on and say, boy, I made some right decisions. I made right decisions with my marriage. I made right decisions with my kids and their families. And I made right decisions with how I wanted to impact the world, some little place that I made somebody's life better along the way. So to have that perspective was really good. I have this book, Halftime. And 4 years ago, kind of coming out of the pandemic, we went to Hawaii in May of 2021. And we were like the third week that the resort that we go to in Hawaii was open. And we couldn't get a rental car. And I like to play tennis. There's a tennis club near the hotel. So I just had to walk there. And so I put in a podcast and was walking to the tennis court and listened to a podcast about some people who were in a mastermind group to kind of challenge each other to be better people on every level: personal life, health, marriage, parenting, business, everything. And it was all guys who do real estate investing. And I'm like, I want that. I just don't want it to have anything to do with real estate, Anyway, so I ended up joining a group with the Halftime Institute. And I was in a group with 5 other people, all really accomplished, a couple of business CEO types, one guy that ran a big commercial banking division of Citibank doing lending to hedge funds, another guy who ran a publicly traded company, another guy who was a 3-star general. A couple other people in the group too are highly accomplished as well. And so to sit down with them for 5 different meetings over the course of about a year and a half and have them challenge me and coaches and kind of build a bunch of things in there, I came away with a personal mission statement that's kind of a begin with the end in mind. So I'll share with everybody what that is for me.
Awesome.
Yours, you got to get your own. But mine is short-term engagements with kingdom impact. And kingdom, I'm referring to like for Christ in that. So I want the things that I do to matter for Christ and for the church. But short-term engagements, meaning I don't want like a new job that's going to last like 10 years or something like that. The things I do, I want to have be things where I start working with somebody and that engagement may last months or a couple of years or something, but it's not forever. And that's somewhat because I like variety in my life. So I didn't want to choose an outcome that was going to be a long-term thing. Short-term engagements with kingdom impact. So I funnel kind of everything I do through that grid. And so sometimes I don't want to do something because it's a longer-term engagement than I want. And sometimes I choose not to do it because it just doesn't fit that kingdom impact, even though it's really good. And so I was recently asked to be on the board of directors for an organization, and it just didn't fit that rubric. And so I said, well, yeah, I'm going to need to pass on that. It's not what I'm prioritizing in this season of my life. So that's, I think, been super helpful to me.
That's really good. Now, earlier you mentioned that tomorrow morning, if I still think it's a good idea, I'm going to do it. I'm going to fire off some emails, see what happens. And you said that was sort of impetuous. But I don't think it's always true that begin with the end in mind has to necessarily be slow. So, which leads us to, you want to talk about that last concept of slow to hire, quick to fire?
Yeah, so a big shout out here to Ned Sudduth. So Ned was one of my core managers at Front Porch for a long time. And one of the things that he did was interview the heck out of people. And So again, for me, I'm like, hey, interview them. If they're good, hire them. This is kind of my early philosophy in staffing. And I had mixed results with my staffing hires. I mean, you're always going to have mixed results. So Ned would just, interview upon interview. And so his goal was to have enough interviews with one of his prospective hires that Ned was 100% sold and that Ned was his partner in getting him hired. Because then that candidate would kind of open the kimono for Ned. And so then Ned would be like, "Oh man, this is a warning sign right here." And so there were people that Ned would interview and get him like 2 or 3 interviews in, and then the guy would start to feel really comfortable with Ned, and then reveal to Ned stuff that wasn't as desirable in an employee. So that hiring slow saved us from a couple people. And sometimes it doesn't work. I won't name names, but you and I can have a laugh after we end the podcast here about a couple people that we both kind of had to deal with because they made it through that gauntlet unscathed. What do you know about that kind of thing, Zach? What do you think?
Well, I love this concept. I think that it is wise to. I take issue with the term, but I think it's wise to be meticulous, especially in committing to long-term relationships like hiring, not only because we want to get the right people on our team, but also because we want to be good stewards of the people that we actually commit to supporting and caring for and providing for with paycheck and asking them to, drop their other stuff. So we want to make sure that it's a good situation for everybody. But I think sometimes when we say slow to hire, quick to fire, what people think is slow on a calendar. And I don't think it actually needs to be. I think it just means be very thorough, be very methodical, be very intentional about the hiring process. It's not just a one and done. It's a number of reps in different situations so that you're thoroughly convinced this person is going to be the best match for the team, for the company, for the mission, that it's going to be the best situation for them, and that person's they're also like thoroughly convinced that this is the best job that they could possibly take. I often tell people, hey, it doesn't mean that you have to take 6 months to hire somebody. In fact, you shouldn't. Get it done in 2 or 3 weeks, and it's going to be a packed, very busy couple of weeks for you. But you're going to end up with somebody who's a really solid hire, or at least is much more likely to be a really solid hire.
Yeah, but it might be more than 2 or 3 weeks. I'm going to give some.
Could be.
I'm going to give some leeway to that perspective now. So Dave Ramsey really talks about this a lot, and I think his thing is like 6 months, but for a lot of positions. But I'm not sure it's all positions. He may be speaking more about higher level leaders in his organization when he says that.
Yeah. Now, what about the quick to fire?
Yeah, quick to fire. Another thought on the quick to fire is, or the first thought I'll share with this is, so if you're a business owner or a manager, a team leader in an organization, and someone on your team does not make your job more joyful, then something about that relationship needs to change. And so sometimes when I've said this to people, they really don't like it. That like my employees are here to make me happy as the leader. And I'm like, actually they are. And I'm gonna stand on this. I'm gonna die on this hill, Zach.
All right, let's do it.
Because I have, as a leader, let's say I own a business and I've got product development, I've got operations, and I've got production or whatever, and I've got sales and marketing, and all of those different groups work for me. If I have somebody on my team that isn't able to carry out at the caliber of the others, it's going to decrease my joy in running that business, because my whole thing is going to be like, why can't we get the production supply chain and production timelines like really nailed? Why are we always sitting there having to tell the salespeople to get on the phone to their customers and tell them it's going to be another 2 weeks before they're going to get what they ordered? And so that joy just isn't going to be there. Or you have somebody who's working for you and they just cause a lot of problems in the team. Maybe they're okay at their job, but just irritates the heck out of everybody. these are like valid reasons for making changes. So I've really used that kind of gut check of my joy level and whether or not when I come to work, if I'm going to be like going, oh gosh, what's this person done next? Then that's an indicator to me that something needs to change. Now, I'm not saying you got to fire them like, when they make you unjoyful one day. It might just be you haven't had coffee. But you got to figure out what's going on and figure out what your responsibility is as the leader to salvage that situation. And if it can't be salvaged, then you got to make that move. And the worst situation I've ever been in where we were not quick to fire was with an employee who had some really strong advocates within the leadership structure that made it difficult to make that move. But even the advocates agreed that that employee brought toxicity to the workplace. Yeah. And so some of the leaders were like, oh, the results are so great that we're willing to accept the toxicity. And I'm like, no, the toxicity is like the worst thing. And there was literally 14 years between the first letter of correction and the final termination of that employee. Anyway, so there was no fast to fire in that particular situation.
So I love to put an asterisk on the quick to fire. So there's some caveats on it. If it is for behaviors that are, clearly out of alignment with expected norms, like let's say there is some sort of sexual misbehavior or being rude to coworkers or something like that. Hey, this is like a fireable offense. We're not even messing around with this. So there's like, you gotta draw your lines, but there's some lines that you should draw. So we're rapid to fire on that. There's no second chances. It's just over. But then the other side is you can be quick to fire for, being out of alignment with expectations and performance sorts of things if and only if you've done your job well as a leader in communicating and clarifying expectations and given enough time for somebody to actually turn around and do the thing that they're expected to do. I really like how Patrick Lencioni says that sometimes firing somebody can be a leader's final act of cowardice. Like if we just get fed up and we're like, I don't want to have the courage to go and have the hard conversation, so I'll just get rid of them. Like that's not a good thing either, right? So we actually have to have the courage to tell people when they're not meeting our expectations. And I've seen that done well, and I've seen it done really, really poorly.
Yeah, there is really a responsibility because we have a responsibility when you hire somebody. There's a responsibility like to them and their family that they've put a certain amount of trust in you for their job and current and future well-being that we have to take seriously. But I'm very much struck with the situations where people have been in roles that they weren't really able to do well, and because of cowardice, haven't fired. All of these things are really fraught with difficulty. And so if you're a person who really, really wants everybody that works for you to be your friend, and you're the Michael Scott kind of manager with that, and you don't want to fire anybody, as he says in that show, that's a problem.
Yep.
And you got to figure out if you're able to be a good leader. That's on you.
Yep.
And if you get angry and just fire people because you're mad at them, you got some work to do.
That's good. What's one book that we didn't talk about today that you think every entrepreneur or business owner should read?
Yeah. The Ideal Team Player, with a person who is hungry, humble, and smart. And smart is defined not as brainy smart, but good relationally, like knows how to work with other people, smart at working with people. Hungry, humble, smart, and the implications of not having one of those key legs on the stool. I think that's been transformational for me, and probably the number one book we should have talked about that we didn't.
Yeah, good.
Next, part 2 on the pod.
There you go. All right, and I'll go, let's see. I'm reading 2 books right now. I am reading Atomic Habits by James Clear, actually rereading, And I would also put that on the list of ones that like everybody should read. One of the most powerful concepts I've taken away from that, I think it actually comes from Charles Duhigg, who kind of wrote before, was you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. I think that's how he says it. The idea being it's what we do by a course of nature that actually builds the progress that we're trying to chase. And then the other book that I'm reading is a new one for me. It's called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. I'm probably just late to the party on this, but his whole concept is you should never do work that you don't enjoy, that you could pay somebody else basically a quarter of what you pay yourself to do, so that you can focus more and more and more of your time on the things that you get the most joy out of and you're the most proficient at. So really interesting concepts. Hey, would you do us the honor of praying to close this out, and maybe just pray for all of the entrepreneurs that might listen to this as well?
Sure. Yeah, God, thanks so much for all the people around us, whether they're friends of ours and mentors that we have, or even books that serve to bring some of those people into our lives. I thank you for them. I thank you for how my life has benefited from the array of actual relationships and relationship by extension that I've had from people over the years, that I'm not the guy that, struggled so much with impetuous decisions and offending people around me because of those insecurities that I was harboring. And I still got a bunch of that. And so God, keep it work within me and be at work in all of us. But thanks so much for those provisions in our lives. Lord, I pray that just one thing out of this podcast would be helpful to each person who listens. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Derek. What a privilege to get to sit with Derek and revisit some of the ideas and the authors that helped us both grow into the leaders and the men that we are today. So whether it was Stephen Sample's reminder to think gray or Covey's call to begin with the end in mind, what really stood out to me is how the best books don't just inform us, they can actually form us. And that formation takes time, takes humility, and takes reflection. So here's a question for you to ponder. Which principle from today's conversation do you need to revisit and then actually apply? Maybe it's delaying a big decision, or finally launching that low-cost probe, or just choosing joy in your leadership and in your team again. Now, if you want help processing that or finding your right next step, I'd love to help. Feel free to book a 15-minute coaching chat with me. The link is in the show notes down below. And that's it for today. So let me leave you with this benediction. As you go, may God grant you the wisdom of the ages, the humility of a teachable spirit, and the courage to live out what you've learned, all for the sake of His glory and His kingdom. Amen.